and welcome to another episode. In today's tutorial, I will be teaching you HTML forms. But before we get started, make sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't subscribed yet. Also, if you like this video, don't forget to give me a thumbs up. Okay, so let's get started. So as usual, I am going to start with HTML forms by using w3schools.com. Make sure to go to the HTML forms section and we're going to get started by there. So what is an HTML form? Okay, so a form is used to collect users' input. So the user is going to send us information through our website using a form. How is the user going to do that? Very simple. The form is like this example, right? An input in where the user is able to send their data. So let's say that somebody wants to request information about our services into our website. They will use a form in order to request that information. That information is going to send to our server, is going to be sent to our server, and once the server receives and processes the information, it's going to store it in a place. But I'm not going to get into the server side section here. We're only going to take a look into how we can create a form with HTML. Okay, so to create a form, we're going to be using the element called form. So it's going to be a tag called form, which you have to close as well. And inside of this form tag, you're going to add the elements of this form. Now, what type of elements are you going to be adding? Let's go into the form elements. So the elements you can add will be input, label, select, text area, button. So there are different type of elements that you can input into your form. Now, each of these elements will have different input types. Well, actually the input element is the one that is going to have different input types. Let's take a look into the input type section. As you can see, there's a whole bunch of them. An input type pretty much determines if you want your users to see a button, a checkbox, a date, what type of information or what type of access you want to give them so that they can send the information out to you. Now, in addition to this, the form itself, it has to contain an attribute. And there's a couple of attributes that you're going to be using here. As we can see, here are just a couple of them. We have the size attribute. We have an attribute called max length. We have an attribute which is going to determine the minimum and the maximum, several type of attributes. So let's go ahead and let's put all this into practice so that you can see exactly how you can input or how you can add a form into your HTML page. We are going to be using the same website that we have been using so far here, which is the one that we created in our last chapter, where we were talking about HTML entities. So if you haven't checked out that chapter, I strongly suggest you to go back and actually take a look at it. Okay, so let's go ahead and take the example that we have into the form section, which gives us this, this form here. Okay, so in order to create this form, the first thing that we have to use is use the form element. So let's go ahead and do that into our website. So we're going to add the form tag. And inside of this form tag, we want to add an input element, okay? But before we want to add an input element, I will strongly recommend you guys to use a label, right? The label element, not the input. Why? Because the label is going to tell our code that we want it, that we want the client to read what type of information we are requesting from them. Like an example here, we are requesting the first name. So the label is going to be the first name. Then the input type is going to be this little box right here, which is going to be a text input type. And then we're going to add another label. Then we're going to add another input text. And then we're going to add a submit input type. Okay, so let's code all this. Okay, so we have already created the form. Now we're going to add an input type called label. Now inside of this label, I want to add an attribute, okay? We want to add the attribute for because we're going to give it a name. We're going to call it first name. So we're going to add F and then name here. And we're going to close this label. Now, if I save this information right now and we go back to our web page here and we refresh, as you can see, right after HTML entities, there's nothing yet because I haven't added anything in between my label tags. All I've added is the label, well, the form section, the label, but I haven't added anything to tell the user something. Okay, so here, let's go ahead and let's say we need your first name, right? So let's put here first name, and I'm gonna save this, and now you're gonna take a look at first name in here. Okay, it looks like we are just adding a regular paragraph, but it's not. Okay, and the reason that I'm adding the for attribute is so that when we input our type of text, when we input the text type, the text type knows that that input is going to belong to the first name. So let me just show you how to do this, okay? So here we're going to add now an input type. Okay, so the input type is going to be, let's add the type. By the way, the type is an attribute for this input. And this is going to be a type of text because we want them to type their names in there. So it's a text, right? So input type is going to be text. Now, there's one more thing that I want to add here, and we're going to add a name for this. And the name is going to be F name. Why are we using the name attribute? You might be wondering. Very simple. If we click here where it says try it yourself, you will see that it has a name. The source code has a name. And the reason why this has a name is because we want to make sure that whatever the user's input in here, it's going to go to what we are requesting here for first name. Okay, so that's why I'm adding this. Now, optional, you can add a value to this, but I'm not going to do it right now. Now, once you have added your input, all you have to do is save this information. And let's go back here to my first web page, and I'm going to refresh this, and voila, there you go. Now you see here's the first name, and now you can add whatever first name you want here. It is showing right next to the first name. It's not showing like in here the little box afterwards or below the first name because I didn't add a line break. Okay, and you want to make sure that you add a line break right after first name. So if I do that, if I add a line break and I hit save, boom, there you go. Now you have the first name and then the little box right below the first name. Okay, now as an option, you can add here another attribute which is called value. Okay, so we're going to use the value attribute. And what the value attribute does is that it's going to tell your username what do you want them to do in this little box right here. So I'm just going to say, or you can put as an example in what you want them to input there. And I'm just going to say, hey, type here your name. Okay, simple as that. So I'm going to save this here and I'm going to refresh. And there you go. Now it's saying type here your name. So now the user, whenever they start typing this thing, whatever they want to type in here, let's say they want to add their name here, like Mary as an example, they erase the suggestion and they put their name in there. Okay, so that's what the value attribute will do. Now, let's go ahead and add another label. The other label tag, we are going to give it a name, and it's going to be last name. So L name. Okay, and then we're going to close this, and we're going to call it last name. Okay, and let's, oops, I am forgetting to leave a line break so that way it's not all together right next to the little box. Okay, so I'm going to add a line break here as well, just to give it a space. And then we're going to save this information, and let's take a look and see here when we refresh. There you go. Now we have here a last name. Okay, now let's go ahead and add an input for the last name. We're gonna give it a type of text, same type. Okay, it's gonna be text, and and I am going to name it last name, because we want to make sure that whatever information is sent through this little box is going to be for the last name. Okay, so last name, and we're gonna put a value here, and we're gonna tell the user, type here your last name. Okay, and now we're just going to close this input. And by the way, on the inputs, you don't have to use a closing tag. Okay, you just have to do the input and put whatever attributes the input has inside. Now I'm going to add a line break here as well. And now we're going to save this information so that you can see the little box that is going to show here. There you go. So type your last name. Okay, now let's go ahead and let's add 2 line breaks to this. 1 line break, 2 line breaks, just to give it a little bit of spacing after the last input. Okay. Okay, so now what we're gonna do here is add the submit button. If we take a look at the source code here, as the source code example, the input has to be of type submit and the value has to be submit. So let me show you why do we have to code this like this. Okay, so we're going to add an input and we're going to name it type, and we're gonna put submit. Okay, because we want a submit button right after the user has input some information into the 2 boxes that we just created. So the type is going to be submit, and the value here, it says that it has to be submit. Not necessarily, you can call it whatever you want, but let's just name it submit, and let's hit save in here, and let's go back to our web page. And I'm going to refresh this. And there you go. Now you have a submit button. Now, again, the value can be whatever you want. So if you don't want to call this button submit, very simple. You go back here and you just change this to, I don't know, let's name it send. And let's save this information. Let's refresh. And there you go. Now it's not the button, it's not called submit, it's called send. Okay. Now, when the user is going to be able to input right now information here, let's say, I don't know, my name and then whatever, though, right? Last name. And then they can input the information, and when they hit send, the page is simply going to refresh. The reason why it's going to do that is because right now we haven't added an action to our web page, to our form, which tells the form to send these information to a server. And I'm not going to go into that just not right now, because we're going to take a look at that whenever I am uploading PHP tutorials. So for now, this is how you guys are going to create a form. So we just have seen the small example here that we have at W3 Schools, but I can show you other type of inputs and other type of form elements. So let's take a look at that right now. So form elements, it says here that we have the label, which we have seen right now, in the input type, right? Now we have another one which is called select. We have another one that it's called text area. We have another one that it's called button. So we have different type of form elements. Let's go ahead and let's use the text area so that you guys can see how is this text area input going to look like. Okay, so first thing we're gonna do is we're going to add right after the last name, we are going to add a label, and we're going to call this label, we're going to give it a name, and we're going to call it description, just because I want to call it description. Okay, and here add a description of what you need. Okay, or let's just say write a description of what you need. Okay, write a description of what you need. And let's give it a line break. I'm going to save this information and we're going to go back to our web page. And there you go. Write a description of what you need. So now we are going to use the text area element. Okay, and let's scroll a little bit down here. And let's see here. Okay, so we have the text area. Okay, so what we are going to use is text area. Okay, and it says here that you have to name it. You have to select how many rows you want the areas to be. And you can even add an attribute which is called calls. But I'm not going to get into this. If you want, you can do more research about the rows and all of that. I'm just simply going to show you how to add a text area. Feel free to read more information in here if you want to know how to use other attributes with this text area element. Okay, so we're gonna name it here. We're gonna give it a name of, whoops, I am typing the text area in the incorrect section. So here's where we want to add the text area, and we're going to give it a name, and the name is going to be description. Why? Because I simply name my previous label description up here, so I want to call my text area description as well. Okay, and this text area has a closing tag, as you can see, and then the cat was playing in the garden, it says here. Okay, so I am just going to leave it empty. I'm going to save this, and let's go back to our first web page, and I'm going to refresh, and there you go. So see, now in the text area section, you are going to be able to allow your user to write a little paragraph or something a little bit bigger than, rather than the usual text input. Okay, the text area, it actually gives them an option to write down a bigger description or a bigger request. Okay, so that's what the text area is used for. Okay, let's go ahead and let's try another type of input. Okay, because we have different type of inputs. As I said before, we have a button, we have a checkbox, we have a color input, we have a date input, etc. So let's go ahead and let's try the email input, which is one of the most common inputs you are going to be using when you're creating websites. Okay, so the email input, you're going to be adding that very simple. Okay, let's go ahead and let's add a label again, and we're going to call it, let's say email. Okay, and we're gonna call it email, and here we're going just to say email. Okay, now we're going to add the input type of email. So input type, let's use the email input, and what we're going to do is use the name, which is going to be email, right? And we're gonna close this input and make sure, of course, that you do a line break if you want this to look good. Okay, let's give a little bit of space in between. Okay, let's save this information. Let's go back to my first web page, and there you go. So now in here, you can add whatever input that you want. Okay, and here you can add a big text, super big text. Okay, so far we have added a couple of fields here, and as you can see, we have added even an email field. You can practice each input because there are several of them that you can practice, and you can learn more about their attributes and the form types and so much more. Okay, you have the input type button, checkbox, color, email. I mean, there is a whole bunch of them, so that way you can also get to learn by trying it yourself. So that's what I have for you for this tutorial on forms. If you have questions, you can always leave them in the comment section below. I will be more than happy to answer those for you as soon as I can. And that's it for this tutorial today, everyone. Also remember, if you like this video, don't forget to give me a thumbs up, and as well subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't subscribed yet. Again, remember that you can always ask Lixi. Bye again, everybody, and see you in the next episode.